a special edition of Over a Barrel, live from Washington, D.C. Well, welcome to Over a Barrel. I'm your co-host, Matt McLean, and the other guy right here,
stuck next to me in a chair this time,
is Patrick DeHaan. Thanks so much for joining us, and we are doing things, right? Give an applause.
There's people in the room. A lot of great folks here in the room at the PDI Connections live conference in D.C. So glad that everyone is here to join us today.
It is not the normal padded room that I talk to myself in. So I'm really happy to see people. They let me out this time, so it's fantastic. Well, thanks so much for joining us. And for those of you who tune in every week, we obviously talk about gas prices. We talk about relevant information, things that are happening maybe in the news, geopolitics. I mean, really basically nothing is off limits. We just want to make sure that we provide all of the great information that Gas Buddy is able to bring in and promote and do all of those types of things. And so without further ado,
I'm still next to you, yeah.
You're still here. Very quickly, for those of you listening, obviously, and you just happen to find us, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, pick your favorite spot that you found us in, and make sure you subscribe to all of that.
If you have any complaints, Matt's email.
Please, yes.
That's right. We're not disclosing it, but actually you can reach us at podcast@gasbuddy.com. We always love the reader questions that we get. There's a lot of those ahead of the election, by the way, and there's a lot of political, all of that. That's really interesting to see as we get closer to November. I feel like the amount of emails coming up that has a politically, oriented question just continue to go up. So love to see all the questions. Keep those coming.
Most definitely. And this is a special week for us. Normally, we just have one or two podcasts a week. This week, we've got all kinds of special podcasts. We got the one right now. So if you're listening, we have another one coming up tomorrow. Do you have a quick tease for tomorrow's?
Well, tomorrow is going to delve down a little bit of that political rabbit hole. There's going to be things on both sides of the aisle, so get excited. You may hear some things that you like and maybe some things that you didn't know. I didn't say didn't like. Hopefully everyone will like part of that episode. But tomorrow's episode is going to be kind of covering a little bit of the political climate and how that could dictate where gas prices go next year and beyond.
Absolutely. So why don't we go ahead and get into what's going on today?
Little Labor Day update here, getting close to the kind of last hurrah for summer. And for most motorists at the pump, we've seen gas prices now falling 4 straight weeks. I feel like I don't get to say that very much in the summer, that gas prices go down 4 straight weeks, and there's a lot of folks that would like to tie that to the election, but thankfully, we've just seen a little bit of weakness in gasoline demand. The national average now at its lowest point since March. I think I may have mistakenly said late February, early. I think those are
I'll take it either way.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Matt, on your way down here, by the way, we'll get into this in a little bit, but a lot more stations today as we come to you are below $3 a gallon. So that's a great thing to see, and more that's going to be coming up in the next couple of months. But for anyone hitting the road for Labor Day, it's been great news. 7 states now with average gas prices below $3 a gallon. Arkansas is just teetering on the edge, probably will fall below that today. So that'll make 8 states. About 20,000 stations now across the country with gas below $3 a gallon. But, that's the update. It's really good, and it'll continue to get better. But, you road tripped here. I'm more curious if, what your experience was. Did you have to pay over $4 anywhere?
Did not have to pay over $4 a gallon, but I do have to eat crow. Last week, we talked about this. You knew I was driving in because I had all the gear. It makes a lot more sense. Load the SUV up, come on in. And you said you pulled open the Gas Buddy app, and I'm like, I don't know if I agree with the assessment. It's saying I'm going to have to fill up a lot more than I normally would. This isn't making any sense. My SUV gets good mileage. Patrick was right. I have to admit it.
Admission. I'm gonna save that somewhere, and we'll have to bring that back up. Actually,
listen, that pains me. I'm squirming in my seat right now. I had to admit that Patrick was right, but Patrick was right.
Well, hey, and it was great news. So that benefited your wallet. Which was terrific. Now, I'm curious. Everyone here probably doesn't know where you came from, so why don't we enlighten folks where you drove from?
I don't even know where I came from.
Just you drove. You just got on the road and
I
started driving.
Came in from Western Kentucky. I'm originally from the St. Louis area, and I drove in from Western Kentucky. And the reason, by the way, that I had to fill up a whole lot more, beautiful, beautiful state. If you have never driven through West Virginia, oh my gosh, I cannot recommend it enough.
Kind of made me want to drive, except I'm in an area where it's a little bit
oh,
more
I sent you
boring.
pictures, right?
Yeah,
I'm
it was
like,
terrific,
good grief.
those sunsets.
But when you're driving in mountains, lo and behold, you don't get as excellent of gas mileage as you do when the roads are flat. So I was filling up just a little bit more often than normal, and it was great, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would do it all over again. So, but yeah, you were right. I was wrong. I have to admit it.
And it's great. So tell us, from Kentucky to D.C., how many hours did it take you?
It was about 12.
So is that like 4 different pit stops then, or?
3 or 4, yeah.
Okay.
I made one in eastern Kentucky, one in western Virginia, and one in Maryland. So 3.
Beautiful.
Actually.
And the best thing is how many times did you have to pay over $3?
Once. And I will say, had it not been
in
for the
August, that's pretty incredible, by the way.
for the Gas Buddy app, had it not been for that, I would have paid probably 40 cents more per gallon than what I did at
We
the
always
station.
preach that, right?
It's
on the
true.
Gas Buddy app.
It
And
is
I always
true.
preach, whether it's Gas Buddy or Google or Waze, right? All 3 of those. And if you're not, consumers are doing that because few of us. Some of us like paying more. I always see the station that's a little bit more, and I wonder why somebody's there. But
Yeah.
So what was your strategy on your way here? Is this something, and I'm curious because I do it, what's your strategy? You check the tank? Do you check the price? Do you know what state gasoline taxes are?
So I knew I was on a deadline. I do a hybrid approach, right? If I've got plenty of time, then I operate a slightly different way. Today and yesterday, I knew I had to be here at a specific time. So I'm like, drive until the tank is on E, right? Make sure that you just keep going and stop as minimal as possible. And that is how I approached it this time. And thankfully, and then used Gas Buddy to find the cheapest gas in the area where I needed it. So that's how
you
I
wait
did
till
it.
you got real low.
Yeah, about a quarter of a tank.
Okay, interesting strategy.
I thought so.
I mean, some people literally run out and then they look at what gas
I
prices are.
don't try to go that route. That's scary.
There's a lot of people that apparently do that in Southern California and end up at that one station that's like $8 a gallon. It's amazing how many of those social media photos
We've talked
are
about
taken
that.
of that, and
Or the ones in Orlando near the airport.
Yes.
Those as well. Those
that have been those prices for many years, by the way.
yeah.
That's always fascinating. So, and those that aren't aware of those stations, there are a couple stations in Orlando. If you've ever flown in or out of the airport, they don't really have signs on the street, although I think there was special legislation that Orlando crafted just for those stations that were taking advantage of some of those Disney travelers.
Yeah.
The Disney excitement, and before you fill up, and you walk out $100,
Absolutely. Well, I know that there are some topics that we were wanting to discuss. And it's something about, I think some of you in this audience have an awful lot of familiarity with. We're going to call them C-stores. For those of you listening, we're talking about convenience stores. And I know
Stopped at a few of those on your way.
I did, and thoroughly
did you eat
enjoyed
there?
it. I did.
All of them?
Again, it
Or
was
did
about
you-
efficient. Not all of them. My goodness, I was trying to,
Well, snacks.
Snacks, right?
Snacks,
Yeah.
get a road trip snack,
No,
beverages.
but the convenience stores, very clean, wonderful, fresh options, food. It was fantastic, and I have no complaints about that either. It made things much easier, convenience, right? Much easier for me than having to go through multiple drive-throughs or going inside. It was
One-stop
a
shop,
one
once
stop.
and done. Now, do you
So-
check the ratings in the Gas Buddy app, or do you just check the price?
I see the ratings, and I go for that, especially if it's in an unfamiliar area. But as you know, I travel a lot. I do video production and other stuff, so I drive across a multitude of states. But places that I'm familiar with, then yeah, I make sure that I pick the
Yeah,
stations.
it was
of
kind of
choice.
interesting. Matt picked me up from the airport to get to D.C. here, and I noticed he had 150,000 miles on the clock. So I'm wondering, for me, 150,000 miles, as we discussed, you're getting there. So
That's 3 years of driving for me.
that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it sounds like you might continue to use that vehicle, but
Till the
there's been a lot
wheels
of
fall
talk, by
off.
the way, of all these articles about hybrids or EVs.
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider an EV for your next vehicle?
Possibly not an EV, but a hybrid I would certainly be interested in, simply
Okay.
because sometimes I have to drive, and again, scheduling and time is money, right, for all of us. So sometimes it's faster to fill up
So maybe
with
not the
fuel.
full jump to an EV,
Right, but maybe a
kind
hybrid.
of a slow approach.
I would certainly consider it. How about that?
And we've talked about that a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. And now, just a couple of days ago, we saw the headline that what was it, GM or was it Ford?
Ford discontinuing,
Ford was discontinuing and slowing down the future transition.
and GM as well.
And we're talking about the sweet spot, I really think. And CNBC this morning had me on. We were talking a little bit more about the EVs as well, that Americans seem to be going for those 100-mile ranges, 200-mile ranges where you can plug in for most of your travel. But then if you're on a road trip, instead of having to worry about the infrastructure in kind of the Appalachia right? Where you may not find some of those superchargers as frequently, you can still fall back on the nation's 150,000 C-stores that offer fueling. And that's kind of the sweet spot. And,
It is.
You know, and of course, with the Gas Buddy app, I'll help you get there.
Absolutely.
But it kind of brings us into the fact, you know, the interesting thing we talk about C-stores that have fueling sites. What I've noticed is some Circle K's in Chicago that do not have fueling sites.
You know, Wawa is doing that in Florida as well.
They're moving in with just convenience stores.
Just the convenience side, no fuel, believe it or not.
That's the really, we have the, you know, the Walgreens and the CVS's of the world. So to see a Circle K or a Wawa, and a lot of those have really good and strong loyalty programs where people, you know, go into a Wawa, they you know, see a selection and they know what's going to be in there. That's another really interesting aspect, and a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening too. I mean, even Seven and I talking to Circle K and how that could change the industry, right? A lot of the developments in the last 10 years as C-stores have adopted to this change in taste, the fact that Americans are now increasingly going into C-store expecting, you know, somewhat of a fresh food option. I think almost all the C-stores I've stopped at in the last couple of months.
Oh, yeah.
You know, one of the stations in West Michigan that I stop at, I was shocked at they bring in fresh Subway from a physical Subway store. And so that's a new dynamic that I haven't seen. Have you seen that?
I've seen stations with an actual Subway in it, but I haven't seen one where it's like ported in.
Yeah,
So
and I was
cool.
honestly expecting it, you know, a sub sitting there with like lettuce and tomato, that it's going to be a little bit, what's the word?
Soggy.
Yes, that is the word. It was going to be a little soggy. I picked it up. I was pleasantly
See how we
surprised.
work so well with one another, you know, filling in the words
It's like,
and everything?
I was like, okay, you know, you expect that it's been sitting there, the bread is, you know, soggy after sitting there with lettuce and tomato, but it was actually fantastic. And it was, I think, just about the same price, so it eliminated another stop.
There you go.
And it's just get it and go, one stop and done.
So you're bringing up food. Let me ask you a question. Do convenience stores tend to make most of their money on gas or the store itself? I think I know the answer to this, but Gas Buddy Guy, what is the answer?
It's kind of evolving, too, because the last couple of years have been good years for convenience stores. They've been challenging years, extremely challenging, but they've been relatively good for those that have navigated. And so back on that, what was the second part of? I answered part of it, but
How much coffee did you have this morning?
not enough.
Okay, I'm just checking. All right, do the convenience stores tend to make most of their money
Yes, okay,
on
so-
gas or the actual store
So it's been
itself?
it's been a couple good years at the canopy, right? Margins have been 30 to 40 to maybe 50 cents a gallon. But generally speaking, the rule of thumb the last couple of decades has been, well, inside the store, right? And that's why Costco has used gasoline as somewhat of a loss leader, or, you know, now it's kind of reversing, but to get people to the location. It's all about getting people to location. So traditionally, the C-store does better in the C-store, where they have a lot of fresh options, get people inside the doors. But fuel has certainly not done bad the last couple of years if you stayed on top of it. But again, staying on top of it, there's been so many fluctuations. I mean, a year ago, we were in the midst of the heat wave. There were refinery shutdowns in the Corn Belt, and suddenly just ahead of Labor Day, gas prices shot up. So there's still very challenging environments at the canopy. And look, during COVID, when stations were barely staying afloat, you know, their margins were very thick, but volumes were very low. So it's been a very challenging environment. But most of the time, it's been in the C-store.
So let me ask a question to the audience here really quick. How many folks here represent convenience stores, C-stores? Let's see your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, yeah, probably about 25%. Oil companies, gasoline, anything along those lines? Got 1, 2, 3, 4. Marketing. Is there anyone else or profession that I did not speak out? Anybody want to yell anything out? Technology. There we go.
All right.
Boy, that's a big one, actually.
It is.
Because I even see like the self-checkout places inside convenience stores now. There's like a whole bunch of technology. Thank you for bringing that up. Anything else? Payments. See?
Well, and that's the thing too. I mean, how many times now at the pump you have all of these different things, whether it's QR readers, you know, code readers, NFC
Pay by
payments,
the app?
exactly,
Where you
all
don't
of
even put the
that.
card in the pump anymore?
And some of these apps now you can remotely activate the pump by paying through your phone, telling it what pump you're at, and then boom, the pump just kicks on. And
That's
all this
exactly what I
technology,
did.
like if you leave your home without your wallet and you just have your phone, there's a lot more cooperation, and that's been fascinating seeing kind of that evolve and wait for these dispensers, which I can't imagine the price of dispensers with all the technology and the security to keep that all safe as well, right? The one thing that most Americans don't think about is you slide your pump or you slide your card at the pump. You know, all the security that goes into that you've got to be really at the top of your game too.
So the answer for you, the store or the gas, which one is most profitable?
Store.
But
you can do well at the pump, but margins fluctuate.
Is that true, convenience store folks? Is that pretty well accurate? I'm getting, for those of you listening, I'm getting shaking of the heads in a yes direction. I promise I'm not in a padded room. I swear. They're here. They really are here. It's not a canned audience. It's not like, they are here. I swear. All right, let me ask another question of you, Patrick. What is responsible for the differences in the premium versus unleaded gas price margins? That is like a heck of a question that's filled with all kinds of stuff.
I love this one.
Okay.
Because that drives me nuts, too, having a couple motorcycles that need 90 octane, which is like the most annoying. It's between mid-grade and premium, but we could go down the rabbit hole in this, but there's a lot of vehicles now through CAFE standards and other things that require premium fuel, and there's been a lot of people that have noticed, like in Chicago now, premium gasoline may be $1.30 to $1.40 more than regular, and in California, it may only be 15 or 30 cents more or 40 cents more between grades. And so a lot of what is responsible for that, and we have had this discussion a little bit, CAFE standards, that is the corporate average fuel economy that was passed under Obama that kind of forced manufacturers to become more efficient. Their average fuel efficiency of their fleet had to go up. So they started incorporating technologies like turbochargers, which we also talked, Mazda is starting to do more turbochargers. The new Corvette is turbocharged. Right?
Really?
The 1,000 horsepower Corvette is now turbocharged.
Like, do Corvettes really need more power?
And now they're they probably needed premium before, but a lot of the difference here is that premium demand has gone up, at least according to Gas Buddy data. Our data now shows that almost 20% of sales of different fuels, 20% is premium, which, jives with a lot of this new technology, manufacturers requiring it, but the difference is in the number on the pump, right? You see the 87s, the 89s, 91s. So why is premium more? Well, first of all, because demand is higher for those higher octanes. The root of the problem with that is something we call alkylate. And that is something that boosts octane that has been in shorter supply. Because the long history of refining has been, we produce 85.5 octane at the refiner. This CAFE standards, these are, in the last 10 or 15 years, this has really all of a sudden boosted premium usage. And you can get more efficiency out of a higher octane fuel. And so alkylate on the West Coast is more plentiful, probably because Jay Leno and all of his fleet of vehicles all need premium. So there's more consumption out in California, where there's more luxury vehicles. There's more vehicles that consume premium on the road all the time. And here in the Midwest, where I'm from in the Midwest, it's going to be, kind of your more average pickup trucks and maybe less vehicles that require premium. So refineries in the Great Lakes and in the Midwest aren't producing as much alkylate. And so that is what the primary component is in premium. And that's why premium gasoline here in the Midwest may be, $1.20. And I say here in the Midwest, we're actually in D.C. But where I'm from in the Midwest, that's why premium can be $1.30 a gallon more than regular, is because it's a lack of alkylate production, which is expensive.
Now, let me ask you, so is that, as a follow-up question, I noticed the spread of price between regular and premium was different here in the eastern part of the country as I was filling up versus the Midwest and Upper South. Is that a refinery thing? Help us understand that a little bit.
Yeah, that's basically it. It's the same reason why the West Coast generally sees lower premium prices, because they have more alkylate capacity at refineries there. And that's just been a long trend, again, because California, the vehicles are more expensive or higher end, or force induction, which is like supercharged, turbocharged. And the East Coast, some of these other areas where you see premium prices through the roof, they've never really skewed to see so much premium being produced. But actually, there's an interesting project that came online in Texas that actually increases the amount of alkylate being produced. And I would, we'll probably see that. There haven't been really any expansions in spending on refinery expansions. That's been tough to come by because refining has been a very boom-bust cycle. But alkylate might be an area where we see improvement. Or the other potential is there's been, E15 is kind of one of the ways that you've seen unleaded 88. There's a little bit more octane and ethanol. That's something that other countries like Brazil do. They have more ethanol content in their fuel. Ethanol has a pro of generally having higher octane, but The con is that it has less BTUs or lower energy, so you get lower fuel efficiency. So there's a lot of that, and I feel like out here, again, if the premium price, I haven't seen it, but it probably is less than $1 a gallon more here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a slightly less disparity than what I'm used to in the middle part of the country. So a little less, not a lot, but a little.
Anyone in this room have a vehicle that needs premium? Only a couple hands?
I see,
Wow,
yeah.
Okay. Well, that's part of the reason why, maybe not in this area where these folks are coming from, but maybe in areas of the Midwest, there's not many folks that need premium. And
Why am I seeing ethanol-free at every single station that I stopped by on the way here? Whereas where I cannot find it, I know of one station within a 100-mile radius back where I live, but over here at all, just by happenstance, or maybe it's just normal, I don't know, but I've got 3 or 4 stations of experience.
anyone prefer ethanol-free, by the way? Anyone? It's still an option.
I got 1, I got 2.
In some of the areas of, ironically, the Corn Belt.
I
Some
thought
of
it was
their
really
blends of gasoline,
surprising.
The regular may not have ethanol, and the mid-grade has ethanol. But,
Yeah.
ethanol-free, small engines, boats. Boat engines are generally behind the curve, about 5 to 10 years. So some of those non-ethanol fuel, we want something that is more stable, and boats may sit for long periods of time. And so people will have a view of wanting a fuel that's more stabilized, because ethanol, there's some pros and cons of ethanol, and it may not do well in an environment where it just sits over the course of winter. So, but generally smaller, older engines, carbureted engines that are not newer may have challenges with long-term ethanol use.
All right, I've got a question, and it's going to be a rabbit hole, sort of, but I'm going to chase it anyway.
Oh, boy.
Is it okay to put ethanol-free gas in the newer vehicles?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Ethanol-free is just going to be a little bit more expensive. It's more of a niche fuel.
It was a very
for some of
shallow
those,
hole.
Smaller, older engines or RVs. But yeah, if you can find it, and you'll probably get just a little bit better fuel efficiency than you would with E10, E15. As the ethanol content goes up to, say, E85, you're going to get a little bit of a hit to your fuel efficiency. So yeah, absolutely. Most cars are designed now for E10, some even E15.
Or Nebraska, it's just E15 at every station.
And it's becoming more and more widespread. Retailers as well have been offering E15 unleaded 88. There's been a benefit there. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too far, but RINs, renewable identification numbers, have incentivized retailers to maybe offer this. We've seen a lot of promotions around it as well, especially from, I think Sheetz on the East Coast has really been highlighting unleaded 88 and promoting it.
All right, thoughts on peak oil. What is peak
That's
oil?
really loaded. Well, that's the theory from the 70s that
Right.
oil consumption was at its peak and that it would continue to decline. And I think we may have hit it now with COVID, and maybe in the U.S. The U.S. is a very mature market, and so as people transition to EVs here, I think obviously oil demand is going to go down in the States, but the U.S. isn't the world, and so global consumption of oil probably will still go up. Best estimates are it may go up for another 5 or 10, maybe even 15 years, and that's where there's a lot of dissension amongst organizations like the IEA, the International Energy Association, and the EIA. Boy, there's a lot of cross wires there, just mixing up the letters, the Energy Information Administration. So peak oil, I think it's happened in the U.S., but probably not abroad, globally. I think there's definitely going to be increasing use. But, and this is where the political foray comes into this a little bit. As countries move to EVs, obviously that can really change the outlook for peak oil, whether it's 5 or 10 years away. If politicians, those in power, all of a sudden start incentivizing EVs, that could obviously change the long term.
So what happens after we have hit peak oil?
Well, consumption starts to go down. Refining, all of that will essentially, pivot, and that's what we've seen large oil companies already doing is beginning the pivot. BP, Beyond Petroleum, right? They saw that about 20 years ago. Wind, solar, hydro. There's a lot of opportunities. Even things like energy from the tides. So there's been a lot of investment, a lot of diversification amongst big oil companies that are now investing in other energy, hydrogen. That's another big one as well. So, that's been another question is as oil consumption, or if production falls, how will it look for gas prices? Will EVs lower gasoline demand and thus lower prices? That's probably been one of the more popular questions. Or people are like, well, are we going to get $1 a gallon gas back?
99 cents. That's my goal.
Matt's
always
been sitting here for the last
it's a pipe dream. I can still hope.
80
right?
episodes.
I can be
of
in
the
denial.
podcast, one of those nostalgic Americans that wants 99-cent gas.
Nothing
But,
wrong with that.
there may be a lot of imbalance as we move towards EVs. Will the investments continue into refineries, or will refineries shut down because the writing is on the wall. How will that work? It could be very lumpy, and we don't really know. But the one thing I would say about especially refineries in Texas, there haven't been any new refineries built in South America, and that is a booming part of the world. And we've seen a lot of refinery expansion in areas like the Middle East and Asia, not so much South America, and that's where a lot of our exports are going. In fact, just last week, the U.S. exported 13 million barrels of distillates in 7 days, and a lot of that product is moving to South America. So, even if the U.S. does start to see declining demand, there's a lot of markets globally that are going to still need a lot of liquid fuels.
So exports may actually go up.
Well, they continue to go up.
Gotcha.
So the U.S. is exporting, between oil and refined products, about 11 million barrels a day. And that's a huge number. And you talk about, LNG as well. A lot of the energy the U.S. is producing, the U.S. has kind of been the, energy security blanket for much of the world, because we've been the world's largest oil producer, natural gas producer, and that's been really critical, especially, what's happening Russia, Ukraine, to solve some of the energy crisis that had blossomed back in 2022.
All right, now I have one more question for you, and I'm a marketer at heart, so I fully understand. I know what goes into these kinds of thoughts, right? Who has the cleanest and best gas? You see, I'm immediately thinking of maybe years ago, Crystal Clear, and I won't finish that, right? But you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Whenever I can get an oil change, I feel like my car's 20 horsepower faster. I think that's like the butt dyno is what they call it. Is your car feels faster after you get it serviced or have an oil change, and I think there's this idea that where you go, right? Some stations market their gasoline differently, and some will say ours will get you further down the road on the same tank.
Some has fuel cleaner.
Right, exactly. Some additives that are added in. So to underscore here that all gasoline has to meet federal standards for the amount of detergents, that is, so your engine is actively being clean as this gasoline is being used. Some marketers, some stations will add additional additives with more detergents. Bottom line is cleanest. Well, I'm not a chemical engineer. We should bring
We interviewed one a week or two ago, right?
So there are small differences that over time, but I also have to say that I don't know how many engines I have seen come in after 150,000 miles and fuel has made a massive difference, right? It's usually the lack of oil changes that the engine will succumb to other maintenance issues. Yeah. So cleanest gas, all gasoline has to meet that minimum detergent level set forth. And for those that don't know, every refinery has an on-site lab to test batches of gasoline to make sure they meet those restrictions. So when I go to a pump, I'm generally not looking at the additives, although I do like stations that guarantee their gasoline, because there are some issues that occasionally arise. But 99%, probably 99.9% of the time, your car is not going to notice any difference. We as humans are emotional, making a difference between types of gas, I don't really know. I think the upkeep of the station is probably more important than where that gasoline is coming from. If the station looks like it's not well kept, it may, there could be some issues.
But for those of you listening right now, especially, always keep in mind that every state has a program where they inspect the pumps, they look at everything, they test everything. It's usually an annual process. And if they detect any problems, obviously that, they're to be corrected. So,
and again, everyone is out there to operate a business, and they want their customers to come back.
Right.
And so that is obviously the goal. But I've never seen, a personal issue with fuel quality. And have you?
Not that I can think of.
And so
nothing comes to mind.
Stations do a really good job, and most states have a Department of Agriculture that falls to that. Yeah. And so, as you said, their pumps are sealed generally once every year or so. I know COVID brought some challenges to states.
COVID brought challenges to everything.
Yeah, that was one of them.
Right? Well, that being said, since we don't normally, get a large audience, why don't we take some questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
See kind of what's going on from all of that.
That's right. Have those questions percolate while we sit up here and talk about, all the ins and outs of fuel quality. Taxes, by the way, which continue to go up on gasoline. That's something that a lot of people, I get a question of, 2008, gasoline was $4 and oil was $150. Why 2022 was gas $5 and oil $130?
Like 70, yeah.
So where's this breaking down? And a lot of people don't remember that many states have continued to increase gasoline taxes over time, and that is a wild card that's not a factor in that proportion. And gasoline has gotten inherently cleaner. We have Tier 3 standards thanks to the EPA that mandate lower sulfur content. all that removal of sulfur content is extremely expensive. And so the cost of refining, we are refining cleaner fuel, diesel, ultra-low sulfur diesel. That's back from 2006. So taxes and fuel has gotten much cleaner.
So you're making my 99 cent a gallon look less and less possible.
The federal tax, gasoline tax, has not increased since 1993, 18.4
But states have.
cents. States have.
Yeah.
So if you look at the state level, California, Illinois, Pennsylvania, 70 cents or more a gallon goes to Uncle Sam.
So my chances
or
of-
the state
yeah.
level.
So it's a pipe dream, but I can still hold out hope.
Question right over here.
Yes,
Nicole.
sir.
All the alternative energies, what do you see as the most viable? And particularly, I'd like your comments on hydrogen.
For the podcast purposes, can you speak right into that microphone for us and ask that one more time?
With all the different alternative energies that are out there, what do you see as the most viable? And particularly, I'd like to hear your comments on hydrogen.
And we were talking about eggs in a basket before we were recording this. There's a lot of different alternative energies, and I think the biggest problem for just about all of them in some way, shape, or form is infrastructure. And I think a big part of that is getting a government boost for building infrastructure. And hydrogen is something that, as I mentioned, companies like BP are working on these hydrogen hubs. In fact, in Northwest Indiana, they're talking about building one. There's a lot of promising forms of energy, whether it be hydrogen or alternative fuels or hybrids or internal combustion engine vehicles still have a place. You know, hydrogen is one of those that shows a lot of potential promise. You have companies like, I believe, Toyota and Honda are looking more at hydrogen. Ford, GM have looked a little bit at hydrogen, but that is certainly one of the potential answers for down the road. But there are certainly a lot of infrastructure challenges with just about all of these, whether it's getting electricity in the middle of Wyoming and having the power grid, right? How many times have we talked about the power grid, especially in Texas, in the last
It's
couple of
very
years?
strained, isn't it?
But there's pros and cons to hydrogen, maybe less cons than pros. But again, building out all that infrastructure and the vehicles. I mean, I think Toyota tried hydrogen and CNG 5-10 years ago, and they've struggled to find a marketplace for that because of some of the challenges that exist that they have not been able to clear those hurdles up until potentially recently. So the infrastructure, the technology's there. Will the infrastructure be able to follow, and who will support it, and will it get support from the government? That's really kind of the biggest question is, I mean, the U.S. is such a large country when it comes to rolling this out. We're at kind of a disadvantage because our grid is so massive. And you think about like a country
Right.
like Germany is the size of Montana. It's no wonder that transit in Europe, and they're so well connected, we struggle with that a bit.
But that's the key, right? Because geographically speaking, our country, it's sometimes difficult to really figure out a one-size-fits-all situation because when you try to do that, you have to think about Alaska and Hawaii and Missouri and D.C. and California, and everybody has their own unique differences in the things that they...
Well, like EVs in a major city, like LA, New York, Chicago makes sense because my average speed is probably about 17 miles an hour on the highway. But then when you get out to Wyoming, where there's very little infrastructure and there's very few folks on the road, liquid fuels make a lot more sense. So
Right.
I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, as it always is. And we've seen, you know, Europe has backed away from going all the way renewable. Now they're falling back on nuclear energy. So even that energy conversation has really evolved as Europe has realized the mistake it made, right? Germany was completely reliant on Russia up until Russia's invasion, and now Europe is talking about potentially revisiting nuclear. There's been talk about nuclear in Australia, where 60% of the power is still via coal. So there's a lot of these really interesting conversations. I know, obviously, there have been some nuclear issues. Fukushima back in 2011 is probably one of the biggest reasons why countries were scared away, but now they're coming back to it because it may be arguably the greenest of the options available out there right now.
Definitely, for sure. Any other questions? We've got a nice young lady over here. We'll wait for the microphone. Yes, ma'am.
I was just curious. I'm from Nebraska, and our unleaded with ethanol is always cheaper. And we've had some people come in from other states that their unleaded without ethanol is cheaper. And I was just wondering why it would vary from state to state.
That's a great question.
And as I mentioned, in Nebraska, right, I think I said in the Corn Belt, there's some of these really interesting areas where there's a lot of ethanol production, but there's still mid-grade, or I should say regular doesn't have ethanol, and mid-grade does. It depends on where you are. Obviously, if you're in an area like the Midwest, where ethanol prices generally are availability is plentiful and prices are much lower. I don't know if even in California, where ethanol is not as well available because it has to be shipped via rail, I'd be hard pressed to be able to, if somebody was pricing that correctly, I don't know that I've ever seen fuel without ethanol cheaper than fuel with ethanol, because the RIN value, right, helps reduce the price of ethanol. I have seen a couple situations where stations have maybe mispriced, where somebody's keyed something in wrong, but just about everywhere, because the lower price of ethanol, almost on a pretty consistent basis, there are some times when there may be a drought, right, that impacts yields of corn, that ethanol prices could drift above gasoline, but traditionally, a bulk majority, north of 95% of the time, if you put ethanol into gasoline, it should be cheaper. So I don't know if there's a station that maybe just mispriced or something like that, but the numbers all, ethanol has been much cheaper. And with, again, another bumper crop for corn this year, corn prices have struggled, and obviously that's going to factor into cheaper ethanol. So generally, the more ethanol content, the cheaper the price. And because the renewable identification numbers also basically credits for blending ethanol into gasoline. And that's also why, Gas Buddy folks have been asking us, what about where can I find gasoline without ethanol? It's becoming harder because stations have, an incentivized environment through the renewable fuel standard, which President Bush signed back, I think, in 2006, 2007. There's been more and more incentive and requirement now to produce and use more renewables. So that would be a rare instance.
That was a great question. Do we have more questions? Oh, we got hands up everywhere. Yes, sir.
Hey, I was curious in your thoughts on fuel pricing and its impact to in-store trips. Heard a little bit from the CPGs this morning on varying degrees of what they were seeing, and obviously their prices going up over the last several years, and seeing those as consumers move to other channels. But when we think about just general average fuel pricing, is there a sweet spot where we see trips increase? And just interested to hear your thoughts on that.
The last couple of years in gasoline demand, everyone has been kind of struggling to rationalize why gasoline demand isn't back this summer, right? Because we continue to move beyond the pandemic. But I think right now, what consumers are dealing with is still just being so nauseous over just general inflation. And it's everywhere across the economy, right? Gasoline demand is down. People aren't taking as many trips. I think they feel so burned out. They may have taken trips in 2022 and 2023. I think a lot of the skew this year is Americans traveling abroad, because that was more of a pain the last couple of years because of COVID restrictions that internationally were much slower. I just think consumers have been really nauseous. But if there is a sweet spot that most Americans think normal, most Americans, by the way, are the affinity is gas that starts below $3. And I think we're going to get that more this fall, and that could help loosen up the consumer and give them, the psychology of they're back to a place where they were a couple years ago. And I think their spending will go up as they start to see more of these price increases start to normalize. But I think that is consumer too. It's like, boy, you go out to eat, there's a fee, there's a surcharge, there's a fee. So it's like it hits you hard in the psyche, and it just kind of burns you out after a while. And I think consumers, coupled with rising borrowing costs, people just, they've kind of run out of steam to spend as much. But I do think when the Fed starts to cut interest rates, which should happen here in the next 4 to 6 weeks, I think we'll start to see consumers coming back. And so I do think it's just the inflation has really burned out the consumer this summer.
It got scary, I know, even for me, when it hit that $5 a gallon mark and kept going up. Especially when you do so much traveling. So I know exactly what he's.
Well,
Thank you for that
and when
question,
you're sitting
by
at
the
the pump and the numbers are going up, you watch the gallons, and that's going up at the normal pace, and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm already $100, and then you have the payments platforms that may have to alter their transaction amounts because transactions are just through the roof. So I think Americans haven't gotten used to more affordable gas, because a lot of them don't think $3 is affordable, even if their wage has gone up. That's still really the key psychological point, is prices have not remained above $3 for a long enough period of time for it to be normal. And so you're still seeing consumers react to the environment of their responding to prices that still feel nauseous to them.
Thank you so much for that question. And the next question.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
A question about renewable diesel. How available is that across the United States?
Very much available in California because there's been a lot of incentives to utilize it, and we're starting to see renewable diesel rise in other areas, whether it's B5 or B10, B20. It's spreading, but I will say that in the last couple of months, there's been a big hit to some of those renewable tax credits that may be slowing it down. In fact, out west, most of California's diesel, by the way, for those that don't know, is basically straight biodiesel now, like B99, which is...
For those who basically fill up with regular unleaded, can you help us understand what renewable diesel is?
Well, it's kind of like ethanol it's soybean-based biodiesel. And so it's less of, the refining process, it's more soybeans. But it's been very expensive. Biodiesel has been very expensive. There's been a lot of tax credits on the West Coast. It's starting to move a little bit more into the rest of the country, but soybean prices have been really high, and the tax environment out west has shifted a lot of the spending for biodiesel to the West Coast. And I think now you'll start to see that evolve more into the country, but there could be a bump in the road here with what's happening in California with those biodiesel credits. The value plummeted because the freight industry has really been in a slowdown. So when there's a certain amount of credits and when suddenly there's not as much demand, those credits plummet in value, and that value is why so much renewable production of diesel is happening. And when those values of the credits plummet, so does production generally.
Thank you for that
There's
question.
been a little bit of heartburn out in the West Coast where those credits have just plummeted, and where refineries have been producing biodiesel, suddenly they're losing $10, $20 a barrel on producing biodiesel. So that's really going to upset things. Another question over here.
You touched on it earlier, the hybrid versus electric, and I'm wondering why the government is pushing electric so much more, particularly when you look at the rare earth minerals that are required to do one EV compared to how many of those hybrids would be able to produce with those same minerals.
I love this question. I'll
It's
try
a
not
great
to get too
question.
political.
That's tomorrow's
But
episode.
politicians in general love doing things that are popular with their constituents, and then they back off when they realize that this is incredibly, well, first of all, they look at EVs being renewable. They don't necessarily look at the rare earth elements that go into the batteries and whatnot, right? The life cycle. Are they recycling the battery? Are they not? There's not a whole lot of in-depth thinking when it comes to that, and I think that's why politicians have just pushed for batteries without realizing the secondary, we're not even recycling those batteries yet. And so that's a product that the product stream hasn't even been, there are companies that are starting to recycle batteries, but yeah, to your point, there's a lot of mining of things like cobalt, lithium, right? And that's inherently coming from countries that, to do all of that, by the way, you're burning diesel, which is basically to the point that politicians, I don't know if they've got that in the life cycle calculus. They see a goal of not wanting to use oil and gasoline, but they also may not realize the ramifications or the difficulty in sourcing rare earth elements. And a lot of those, by the way, China has been a huge country for rare earth elements, and obviously our relationship with China has been a little bit on the rocks lately.
It's excellent. What are you talking about?
Australia, by the way, is another country that has a lot of rare earth elements, and they are starting to really ramp up as quickly as they can. But I think politicians are just looking at the end goal without realizing what it's going to take to get there.
Thank you for that question very much. We have another question on this side of the room. Yes, sir.
Through following a lot of, premier motorsports things, like Formula One especially, they have a lot of talks about, renewable or synthetic fuels, I guess, kind of to replace petroleum-based fuel. Do you have any insight on, kind of what the feasibility of that is for the rest of the world eventually? And, I guess just any other kind of information about what that might lead to?
So yeah, a lot of motorsports. Those that don't know, a couple of years ago, NASCAR was one of the institutions that switched to E85. So all NASCAR vehicles now use E85. We talked about the benefit of ethanol having higher octane, so they can inherently drive those engines harder. Same thing for F1. F1's been a little bit slower to the punch. They are trying to get to 5 to 10% ethanol content, but it does take time to make that switch. Now, where the rest of the world comes into play is keeping in mind that right now, there's, a lot of what we're seeing is corn and sugar-based ethanol. The problem is Brazil and the U.S. are the largest producers, and for the world to change to it, there's going to be a lot of increased demand. So there's talk about even, producing ethanol content from not just the corn kernel, but like the husks and just getting the whole life cycle down. It's going to take a long time for them to get there, but a lot of the motorsports are, in their sustainability efforts, because that really, curries them a lot of favor with politicians, with regulatory bodies, are trying to make that move. It's not feasible in the long term for everyone to see, 85% ethanol content, but, as we start to learn more about potentially using recycled agriculture products that can be used or made into ethanol, you might see that uptick. And that's, by the way, sustainable aviation fuel is also kind of a part of this conversation. Is airlines like United and American Airlines are trying to basically incorporate some level of ethanol into sustainable aviation fuel, and that's getting a lot of tax credits too. So, we'll probably see more, but the traditional use has been kernel-based corn ethanol and sugar-based ethanol, and you're going to have to grow a lot of corn and a lot of sugar cane.
You hear that, Nebraska?
All that ethanol.
A lot of corn.
Yeah.
Let's work on it. The corn huskers. That's what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, see? She knows exactly what I'm talking about. I drove through there last year. A lot of corn. I'm not joking. Yes, sir, you have a question.
Yeah, I was at a conference a few years ago, and one of the keynote speakers made the case that fully autonomous vehicles would be everywhere within the next 20 to 30 years. Do you think that will happen? And if it does happen, what do you foresee the impact being on the C-store industry and fuel consumption as a whole?
Those people still need to go to the bathroom. They'll still need to stop. Yeah, interesting dynamic. And again, this is one of the goalposts that's going to continue moving, right, along with the EVs, how quickly that's going to happen. I don't know, 20 to 30 years, that seems feasible. The question is the government going to be able to regulate it quickly enough to develop standards that cars can basically talk to each other without crashing? Right now it's really discombobulated, right? Waymo autonomous vehicles are honking at each other in parking lots, so I think we've got a lot of work to do there. I think 20 to 30 years is feasible. What was the second part of your question?
If it does happen,
Yeah.
what impact do you see that on the other industry for those of you listening right now?
People are still going to want to stop and snacks. The convenience, and that's why I think the M&A in the industry is still happening. You still need real estate to get people, people still want to stop and take in the scenery. You stopped, whether it was at a hotel or for snacks or for food. So I don't, it's going to get people to where they need to go a little bit better, and maybe they'll be able to sleep in the car at some point and skip through all that. I don't think people are just going to cut out the C-store. I think people are going to want to stop, take a break, stretch their legs, because just like on an airplane, right, this is not something we have figured out where it's completely comfortable and people just love to, people don't like sleeping in their cars yet. Maybe once that mantra switches around, then we got to be worried. But I think that's a long way away yet, and I think people will still, crave the stoppings and take in the scenery around them.
Probably not in our lifetimes.
I mean, maybe there is the case for when I drove from Phoenix back to Michigan at one point. I would want to do it straight through, but still those autonomous vehicles are going to have to stop, and maybe solid state batteries will come, and by then you could have a 12-hour range. I still think people are going to need to stop and stretch their legs and go to the bathroom, especially families. So I don't think that there's much of a threat to the business model of convenience. There may be an evolution, right, to more locations that are more convenient, whether they be on highways. You look at Europe, by the way, and a lot of their, direct, Germany, France, you just get right off the Autobahn and into a store. And that's where the U.S. you may start to see more of that, like Ohio Turnpike, right? They have a concessions agreement, and so you may see more convenience yet.
We have a question right here. Yes, sir.
Patrick, I know your schedule is crazy with your interviews, be it radio, television. I'm curious.
My calendar open?
No, it's not. I'm just curious, so what are the commonalities or the main kind of themes that you're getting, whether it's doing Stuart Varney on a national broadcast or whether it's a localized TV or radio station? What are the themes that are consistent? Is that all about price?
Close. It starts with a P, but right now it's all about politics. 90% of the conversations, are about politics, what's going to happen, what it's going to look like, which is why the session tomorrow, where we delve into what it's going to look like and answer some of those questions, I think a lot of it is about prices, though. But prices and politics are very much bundled together.
But does the political element of it really affect the price, or is that more
A lot of it is
perceived?
myth busting.
Okay.
So yeah, it has less of a role than a lot of Americans would believe. But a lot of Americans, that's going to be a tough convincing job to believe them that the world exists outside of politics.
I'm biting my tongue right now because we've got an episode tomorrow. I'm just going to leave it at that because I really want to carry on with that. It's such a great
But
conversation.
no, it's always about price. I mean, so many folks are, and that's the beauty of prices in the U.S. is like you go to Europe and you don't see
Right.
as many signs or as many convenience stores. That was something I was going to hit on, by the way. My brother did a bicycle event in Paris a year ago, and I needed USB chargers to power things, and I had to literally go 20 different stops to find a cigarette USB adapter, and that's something I can literally go into any C-store and find here in the U.S. The other thing I could not find is he was doing a bike race. They don't have ice. And if you ask for ice, they're thinking you want vanilla ice cream. And so, I think it's really interesting, the changes that are happening over there. But again, a lot of evolution and convenience here in the U.S., and it's amazing. I mean, you were talking about how some gas stations deliver their C-store products. Like anything in the gas station you can have delivered?
Oh yeah, you can get them on your favorite apps,
Like
Grubhub
DoorDash. Yeah,
and
the whole,
DoorDash, and you can get pizza, you can get chicken tenders, you can get fresh foods, sub sandwiches. Even where I live in Western Kentucky, the same thing. You can just order it up on
convenience has
DoorDash and they
become
deliver it to your house.
Yeah, I have a Shell station like literally 100 feet from my house, and I'm always going in there.
Yeah, and they're making a big marketing for the marketers in the room. They're doing a big marketing push now available on, and they list a whole bunch of different apps for you to be able to get your food delivered from
And
their
not
place.
only are the Walgreens and CVS's watching kind of C-stores evolve
Yeah.
into this position, but they're also watching some of their really well done chains are offering more and more products that people don't have to go to a grocery store for, whether it's bread, produce, all of it in a C-store, and it's just a one-stop shop now.
Well, Patrick, we are just about out of time, but for those of you listening right now, this is episode 1 this week. We have a special episode coming up again tomorrow. Talk to us very quickly. Give us a tease.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about how politicians can influence gas prices. We'll try to debunk some of that, where they do, where they don't impact prices. There's a lot of these myths ahead of the election, and there's a lot of political finger-pointing on both sides of the aisle, I might add. So we'll try to get some correct information out there for everyone who has questions about what gas prices will look like, and will it really be the end of the world for gasoline, or will it not?
I'm wondering what y'all are doing next week, because this is so much more fun. Join us every week. You can ask all the questions. We'll just add to the mix every week. We'll just keep adding people. I mean, we can do it remotely, right? I mean, can't we do that on Teams? We'll just have
get a big Zoom room.
couple hundred people. It's great.
Yeah, and
The
for
Voice
those-
did it during the COVID shutdown. If you look when they were in the music competition, they had a wall of people.
The happy hour when we were craving human activity.
Right.
So it can be done. But
Thank
I
you
want
so
to thank
much.
our live audience for joining us, asking some great questions. It was a lot of fun. For those that follow, like, subscribe, review the podcast. We're on YouTube, Over a Barrel on Twitter or X. We're on Facebook. Again, thanks for everyone who tuned in and listened, and thank you to our live audience for joining.
Big round of applause. Well, that is going to wrap up today's edition of Over a Barrel. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be back in about 24 hours or so. Have a good one.